Hi, this is Carla Finnison, and for our digital presentation, I will be focusing on the interpersonal communication ethics, specifically the distance and demand theories. And using memory and Alzheimer's disease, I will be highlighting some of the challenges of distance and demand through the use of the film Iris, which was made in 2001, directed by Richard Eyre, and in the following 11 slides we will have a couple of clips in which you can see the relationship between the couple affected with Alzheimer's, both pre-diagnosis as well as post-diagnosis. For interpersonal communication, there are three assumptions of the ethic that correspond to the theories of demand and distance. The overarching premise is that parties within a relationship have the responsibility to manage the relationship and not the other. As our text has made sure to reinforce throughout many of the chapters, interpersonal communication is only one form and not the primary form of communication. And overall, the goal of interpersonal communication should include nourishing the relationship instead of advancing self-serving elements such as one's career or seeking out some kind of reward through the benefit of extending selflessness to the other. A quote in in chapter 7 is, "It is burden that adds meaning to a well-lived life," and as we will see in the following slides, Alzheimer's disease, and particularly diseases of the mind that affect the ability to recall and remember, are particularly burdensome. And when either couple is going through, either person within the relationship is going through this type of progressive disease, it's really important to have some support and guidance as well as communication strategies to help limit the amount of burden and contributing ultimately to a life well lived, even if it's just the memory of a life that was lived once with the person. For definition purposes, distance includes limiting the demand one places upon the other, allowing for relational distance. And this is what Martin Buber refers to as overrunning, which simply means we do not ask of the relationship more than what the time and situation and the other person are in the capacity to give. As we will see later on with Alzheimer's disease, it is impossible to ask the other partner for intimacy when they themselves can't even remember who the person is looking at them. Demand forces the other to fit the other's approval, which erodes authenticity of the relationship and stunts its natural evolution. Again, in the case of Alzheimer's disease, the evolution is actually a regression of the relationship, but according to the theory, we still need to respect and honor the relationship and the commitment to the relationship. Some of the benefits of both limiting demand and increasing intentional distance means creating and recalling memories in between the here and there. And the here and there, according to our text, is basically the journey along the way of meeting someone to the end of that relationship, whether it's through death, Alzheimer's, or just the separation. So why do we study the importance of interpersonal relationship communications where a partner's spouse is diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease? At present, in 2016, 5 million Americans have been diagnosed with the disease, and it's not just 5 million people who are affected, it's the relatives and the family and support of those 5 million. So really that number is low with those who have to manage that disease. Constant demands made of the other, whether it be the caregiver in this case or the care receiver, those type of demands can really transform interpersonal communication from one of being attentive to that of being burdensome and confused. Partners transition, as I mentioned earlier, from a relationship where there was an intimate bond to a caregiver and care receiver. And as it stands right now in the medical community, couples are not really equipped with ongoing family relational therapy care to help them both manage the journey of change that occurs with Alzheimer's, including the emotional and psychological aspects of communication. In the next couple of slides, we will see two clips. Again, one will feature an interaction between Iris and John as they're meeting and deciding to become a couple. And then the latter relationship is when John is actually reading a novel that Iris wrote to her, and you can see the pain in both of their eyes because she can slightly remember, but she can't, but she wants to, and we can see how John's demand of her to remember places more burden actually on her. So it's really a poignant clip, and it highlights the selflessness of giving distance while not demanding. Arnett et al., 2008, our texts obviously conclude partners have a responsibility to place the relationship above the particular needs of the individual. And ultimately, those who are experiencing a relationship where Alzheimer's is prevalent, that is equivalent to experiencing ambiguous loss. And ambiguous loss is a loss where the person is still present, but the emotions and the history is no longer there. So again, the clip is about 2.5 minutes, and this is at the onset of John and Iris's relationship.
There was a friend who was a student with me. He can wait. He was not the first person I went to bed with. That was Harry. Then there was Roger, who wanted to marry me. And Oscar, who said he couldn't live without me. And Tom, who far too clearly could, but... So, the student friend I had resisted going to bed with joined the army during the war and promptly asked me to marry him for... He was certain he was going to be killed, wanted me to have the widow's pension. Yes, I know, they all said that. Anyway, I didn't want to marry him. But I did go to bed with him. I thought that best before he went off to fight, because you never know. Anyway, he was killed. My student friend. And we weren't married. So, no pension.
It wouldn't have been much anyway. I know, because I had friends killed. Their wives got very little. Get very, very little. Is that all? I mean, roughly. What about the friends in your other world?
You know more about me than anyone on earth. You are my world.
And the next scene is, as mentioned earlier, the book reading to Iris, and we'll see the movement from John being her world to her losing her world.
Occupied in observing Mr. Bingley's attentions to her sister, Elizabeth was far from suspecting that she was herself becoming an object of some interest in the eyes of his friend. Mr. Darcy had at first scarcely allowed her to be pretty.
I wrote.
Yes, my darling clever cat. You wrote books.
Books. I wrote.
You wrote novels. Wonderful novels.
I wrote.
Such things you wrote. Special things.
In light of the acknowledgement that the lights indeed will go out, I'll take a look at some of the traditional approaches to communication strategies and some for future consideration. Traditional communication strategies for those with Alzheimer's have included speaking louder to the patient, tuning them out, and a part of that comes with the undue burden and stress of the caretaker, and then speaking in sentences containing too much information which the patient cannot understand. And I believe we saw a little bit of that in the clip where John was reading Iris's book back to her. And the results of traditional communication practices lead to confusion, depression, and actually poor health outcomes for both parties. Something to consider with future research and communication within Alzheimer's disease is actually a call for the Perception of Conversation Index dementia of the Alzheimer's type. And these communication standards support speaking slower, using a normal tone, not yelling at the patient, using simple sentence structures, and also repeat consistent information. And then for the caregiver, which is a component that's oftentimes left out, is the need for them to dedicate time away from the patient and use joint illness talk to recall better times of the relationship, which ultimately moves the focus away from the challenges of the illness to recalling the happier memories of time spent with their former partner. And in conclusion, and keeping in alignment with being my brother's keeper, maintaining a relationship with a person who can't recall the other requires the caregiver to not demand a level of intimacy no longer offered by the partner, while maintaining enough personal distance to retain an amount of autonomy. This is again an example of what Martin Buber referred to as overrunning reality. Next, implementing solutions as suggested in the PCI-DAT could help mitigate unwanted side effects of managing relations with partners who can't remember. And then lastly, embracing joint illness talk, which would allow caregivers to create narratives of their past relationship, making the journey of taking care of someone with Alzheimer's disease congruent with the overall interpersonal communication ethics of demand and distance. And as you can see, I have attached my source references, and I do appreciate your watching my video. I will also upload a copy of my paper to supplement the presentation, as I chose to do a digital presentation that followed the journey of a couple through Alzheimer's disease instead of the structure of the research paper. Thanks so much.